I'm very excited to welcome Professor Kansteiner to BYU, and he is one of the most eloquent speakers that I know, so my primary purpose introduction is to get out of the way as quickly as possible. He comes to us from Aarhus University, which is in Denmark, but he's actually German. He's from Dortmund. He did much of his schooling at UCLA and got his PhD in 1997 with the eminent Holocaust historian Zal Friedlander. He held a number of academic appointments here in the United States afterwards, including at the State University of New York in Binghamton. A lot of his early research is on German media history, so television history, but what he's perhaps most known for is his work in collective memory. He is indeed one of the pioneers of the study of collective memory as an academic discipline. He's currently the president of the Memory Studies Association. And some of his most recent articles, he's written an enormous number. He's very prolific, they're always on current topics, hot topics. So agonistic memory, artificial intelligence, and the importance of video games, for example, in forming collective memories. So it is with distinct pleasure that I am excited to hear Dr. Kansteiner speak to us today.
Well, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. Thank you very much for having me, and I will try to be brief because I will move fast because our agenda for today is relatively ambitious, and I want to have some time for Q&A. So what I want to do is I want to try to answer that question. What is good history? And more important for me, as Stuart has already said, what is good memory? And when I talk about history, I talk about academic history, the kind of research we do. When I talk about memory, I talk about how societies and groups remember. I talk about social memory, collective memory, which is always mediated, and therefore it's dependent on our what I call media ecologies. So I will try to do this in 5 steps and then come up with a number of concrete recommendations of how we should craft our memory in the immediate future. As Stuart pointed out, what I try to say is always tries to be relevant to the present, because collective memory is always about the present. It's always about positioning us here for the challenges ahead. And that's, of course, something I like to follow. So, 5 chapters and hopefully a concrete conclusion. And I begin with very different perspectives. The first perspective is the perspective of historical theory. Historical theory, philosophy of history, is the field of experts that study historians to try to figure out what historians do. And maybe it comes as a surprise to you, the experts don't know what historians do. History, as a field of knowledge, is something that I would call unsettled knowledge. We don't know. There are 3 different explanations at the moment that are in competition with each other. One of them is history is about empiricism. It's about empirical work. It's the truth of history. It's the truth about the past. The other one is, since the 1970s, since the linguistic turn, it's all about stories. Historians just tell stories. And the type of stories they tell are not determined by the facts, not determined by the sources. They reflect our values and our politics, not our empirical grounding. And the new kid on the block are the post-narrativists. They argue that history is about arguing, that historians don't narrate. They are empirical, yes, but their most important task is making a case. Be that as it may, for our purposes, it's important to know there's no agreement, but for our purposes, it's also important to recognize that most people, the vast majority of people, may they be in historical theory, philosophy of history, science studies, or history didactics, the vast majority are convinced that there is a gap between the facts that historians determine and the stories or the arguments that they craft. And that the gap exists everywhere. We cannot, it's the facts that exist do not determine into what type of narratives and what type of arguments they are integrated into. That's so to speak, that's the status quo at the moment. If they're right or wrong, for you to decide. But it's a point of departure. It's one of the things that plays a role. And I want to give immediately an example of that, more or less consensus, using the term of the Holocaust as an example. The term like the Holocaust, or term like World War I or World War II, for historical theorists, they are colligatory concepts. They are concepts that we use to grab a myriad of different events and give them meaning. And again, the events don't tell us how to colligate them, how we give meaning to them. And if we apply that to the Holocaust, we come immediately to some provocative hypothesis. The provocative hypothesis is that, yes, 6 million people were killed by German perpetrators and their collaborators. That's a fact. But already this seemingly unproblematic sentence, Hitler and his henchmen planned and perpetrated the final solution, is an interpretation. Many experts in the field will not agree with that sentence. They think it's way too narrow. So this narrative sentence is an interpretation, not a fact, because there are lots of other factors at play, right? And this argument, the Holocaust is a unique, unprecedented event that commits us to memory obligations. That argument is also an interpretation. It's not a fact. And the difference between these two levels, between fact and interpretations, it is constantly conflated in both academic history and in memory culture. And it's a problem. Just remember that. We come back to that. Here is an example of an academic proposing a different colligatory concept, Bloodlands. Because Timothy Snyder, as a historian, would argue it makes a hell of a lot more sense to use Bloodlands as a colligation, because we should always remember and study the crimes of the Nazi regime in the context of the crimes of the Soviet regime as well. And in many ways, he has a good case here. But again, colligatory concepts are interpretations. They're not facts. And from a different perspective, other colligatory concepts make as much sense. So here's the dilemma. The dilemma of historian and memory culture is that we are appreciated for the facts we create, but the most important service we deliver to society is large-scale interpretations, and they are not facts. Right? That's the dilemma of history and memory culture. We'll come back to that. Next one, memory, the memory square. And here I want to suggest how memory and conflicts about memory are playing out in the media, in the present, in our societies on a global scale. And I want to suggest that there are 4 substantial narrative sentences, positionings, that guide our memory culture. And there are more, there could be more sentences, but I think those are the important ones at the moment, and I'll give you examples for that in a minute. The first one is, in terms of our memory, we are looking back, what we have done, we are good. We're good people. You know, we are looking at our accomplishments, we're looking at our heroes. The next one is, we were bad. We have done wrong, we have done bad things, implying also, we are better now. Next one in the square is, we are bad in the here and now. And that sentence is forcing us to make changes immediately. Right? That's the most disturbing of all the sentences here. And the last one is, we will have been bad if we don't change our ways. Right? So we are positioning us in time, and we're also positioning us vis-a-vis others. Here's some content. The we are good is the classic heroic memory, let's say, since the 19th century, right? Where we celebrate our accomplishments and our heroes. The next one, we were bad, is the official memory of many Western institutions, including the United Nations, including the European Union, including IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And here the point is often focused on World War II, the catastrophes of World War II, especially Auschwitz and the Holocaust, and implying we have to look at the abyss of those crimes to recognize what we have done wrong in order to prevent the reoccurrence of similar catastrophes. The next one, we are bad, or maybe more often used in the current context, you are bad. That's what I would argue is the new memory paradigm that is establishing itself as maybe one of the most dominant global paradigms of memory as we speak. I want to call it the post-colonial memory paradigm. The post-colonial memory paradigm fuses two things. It fuses the history of racism, for instance, slavery, with a history of racism in the present. And these two elements together amount to a very significant charge. That is, racism has existed, racism exists, and you have to change it. And I would say a significant part of, for example, the academic establishment in many privileged countries is increasingly embracing this charge, turning it into, we are bad, and we need to change, and we need to change now. If you agree or disagree with that, that's not the point here. The point is, we are witnessing at the moment the coming into existence of a very new memory paradigm that is truly global and encompasses many countries that have not been in the privileged Northwest in the past. The last one, we will have been bad, is what I would call Anthropocenic memory. It's the memory of future climate crises and catastrophes that we remember in order to prevent them from happening. You know, notice that time runs reverse. Remember the future in the here and now in order to prevent it from happening. So it's a different type of memory game, right? Those are the stories. Let's apply them very quickly to some of the conflicts of the present. Here, Russia and Ukraine. The heroic memory, it was celebrated par excellence on May 9th in Moscow. It's the most important holiday in the calendar of Russian memory, and it is wrapping into one heroic memory, pre-communist, communist, and post-communist history. Right? We are the best. And Ukraine is debating and in the process of shifting that day, marking the end of World War II, by one day, from May 9th to May 8th. And just that one day means that Ukraine is shifting its memory from the heroic memory of Russian culture towards the EU. Because May 8th is, yes, the celebration of the end of World War II, but it's always tinged in Europe with a memory of the liberation of the camps and hence the memory of the Holocaust, which is much more self-reflexive and self-critical. Right? So it is moving Ukraine from we are good and we were good to we are implicated in failures. For example, opening the door to think about Ukrainian collaborators in the Holocaust. Incidentally, that memory, becoming part of the cosmopolitan memory paradigm of self-criticism and self-reflection, is a precondition for joining the European Union. Another example, and this is, in terms of memory politics, fantastically interesting. On the one hand, we see here Palestine emerging as one of the preeminent sites of memory for post-colonial memory. Right? Across the world, use of the Palestinian flag is now indicating the rise of post-colonial memory into a predominant memory. Post-colonial narratives have existed for a very long time, but that they now fuse very different countries and cultures together. That's happening right now, and the conflict around Gaza is a catalyst in that sense. The second case is also very interesting because it leads to a bizarre fragmentation of memory. You would think that Israel and Germany agree because they join the same memory culture, that is, the memory of the Holocaust. They do, and they don't. In Israel, Holocaust memory has never been self-critical. In Israel, Holocaust memory has always been part of a heroic national memory of self-assertion. In Germany, on the other hand, Holocaust memory has always been the we were bad sign and sentence, and therefore something very strange happens right now that makes German memory culture almost implode. Because the following thing is happening. Because we were bad as Germans, we have to support Israel. So our unquestioned support for Israel. But Israel, right now, is, by most experts' interpretation, is committing war crimes. So the German support that was meant to have never again crimes against humanity is actually implicated in the perpetration of crimes against humanity in Israel. Hence, for example, the case that Nicaragua has just launched in the European Court of Human Rights against Germany, which is a bizarre situation for Germans who take a certain amount of pride in being the best at coming to terms with the past. Right? So it's a very, very intriguing situation we are witnessing. That paradigm is stabilizing. These paradigms, especially the cosmopolitan one, is becoming a victim of its own contradictions. Now let's apply the square to us here in the United States. I find an intriguing moment to study American memory. There is, for example, the rise of an American-made cosmopolitan memory, the history of slavery. So the National Memorial Peace and Justice Memorial, the memorial in Alabama, I would say, is true cosmopolitan memory. We were bad, right? At the same time, you have the rise of activist movement that also insists, hey, we are bad here and now. Here's the logo of the Utah chapter that I found online yesterday. And then, of course, a lot of American history is about heroism. The vast amount of American memory is a heroism. A lot of military heroism is about we are the heroes. That makes sense maybe with regard to World War II. For most of the wars afterwards, it doesn't make much sense, but it is still the dominant method, paradigm of interpretation. And here, this scene, believe it or not, that is Anthropocenic memory at your doorsteps, because this is a photo of the Great Lake drying up. Right? And all the discussions, will it dry up? When will it dry up? That's Anthropocenic memory. Imagining the catastrophes of the future in order to prevent them from happening. So all of this is happening in the United States at the same time, making the US, as always, a highly dynamic and very interesting site to study. Now I want to bring in the question of nationalism. I want to do this very quickly. First point, heroic memory is likely the default memory. Groups like to think positively about themselves. Second point, heroic memory has been since the 19th century mostly the memory of nationalism. We have to acknowledge that. Next point, all of these stories, all these lines can be nationally charged. You can have a national memory of Anthropocenic memory. For example, that happens in Scandinavia. Scandinavians are very proud of their environmental policies. So they have a national memory of pride, right? A heroic memory infused with Anthropocenic memory. West Germans, you can argue, have a national memory infused with pride about coming to terms with the past. So these templates always intermingle, and they glide towards heroism, I would argue. Now, here is where nationalism comes in. And I'm talking about the nationalism, the rise of nationalism across Europe, France, Germany, Poland, Hungary, but also the United States. Trump is the phenomenon. And whatever you think about Trump or the other right-wingers, their memory politics are a strike of genius. And I, for one, I'm not happy about that. But it's intelligently crafted, because what the right has done is to create a new we. The we in right-wing memory is a we that is separating itself from other parts of the nation. So the we is facing two types of others. It is facing the others outside of the nation, immigrants, but it's also facing, and primarily, the others, the internal others, the internal enemies. And in terms of memory politics, that's the focus, right? So the focus, let me give you this example here. Conservative memory is a triangle, it's not a square, because conservative memory doesn't have an Anthropocenic register. It simply doesn't exist, right? Again, if you agree or not, that's your point. But if you look at the texts, they don't have Anthropocenic memory. So they're only a triangle. And the triangle is, we are good, but on the good side, they're basically using a canon of heroism that is not that dissimilar from the traditional one. You know, even in the canon of Trump, there is Martin Luther King, right? But what is new and what is very effective are these two others. The they, one doesn't even talk about, the immigrants. We remember the crisis, you know, all the crises at the border. And the you, the left, that is remembered as the perpetrator. The perpetrator has three registers: carbon politics, migration failure, and PC culture. You know, they are remembered as the problem. So that turns conservative culture into a very, very interesting memory culture. And in many ways, what makes it so brilliant is that conservative memory has co-opted the cosmopolitan paradigm. Remember, cosmopolitans said we were bad, right? And from a post-colonial perspective, they say we are bad. And the conservatives say, well, if you feel so bad about yourself, let me give you another reason, right? So they're basically running into the open doors of cosmopolitan self-criticism. That makes it so effective, and perhaps also dangerous. But I find it, as a memory scholar, I find it first and foremost intriguing. The question is how to respond, if one wants to respond. And I think one of the responses that people of my field are hesitant to embrace, but I think it's very important to embrace the nation. To create we's, to create inclusive we's on a national scale and a transnational scale, right? We cannot leave the nation behind because most people don't want to leave it behind. Simple as that. So, the challenge here is, the question is always, what memory? How much self-praise? How much self-criticism? And how much, I want to add to this, how much forgetting? What memory is good for us? Obviously, I try to have an answer. Next one. Very quickly now. Not all memories are created equal. Not all media ecologies are created equal. Some technologies are very good for one task, and they're terrible for other tasks. And we haven't quite figured out yet our media culture. We don't know exactly yet what digital media are really good at. Let me give you an example. The analog digital media, the analog electronic media ecology started after the war, 1945. You know, life-size pictures of the corpses of Bergen-Belsen to create memories in the American public and explain to the American public why Americans went to war in Europe. Right? So the visuality of the crime, the abyss, is there from the get-go, from the beginning. But the Holocaust, as a colligatory concept, only becomes popular in the 1970s and especially the 1980s as a result of that television series. The television series Holocaust creates Holocaust as a colligatory concept, as a memory idea. It didn't exist beforehand. And by the way, the Holocaust series was an answer to another very successful series, Roots, that dealt with slavery. So this was always a comparative phenomenon. Now, afterwards, that memory culture is put into stone. Washington, Berlin. But it's at home, on television, and in film. This is examples of thousands of television productions that are creating the stable interpretive frame of the Holocaust. And it is a very important accomplishment in memory culture, Western memory culture, because it has a strong element of self-criticism. We were bad. We failed. Right? That's an important accomplishment, even if you're critical. However, I want to add immediately, technologies are not neutral. They're not innocent. Television was a successful medium at inviting reflection about the Nazi past, even in the country of the perpetrators, because it created this eerie kind of parallel between watching as a bystander doing the events and watching as a bystander on television afterwards, because it creates this kind of idea where you can reduce to and think, I'm just a bystander. I'm not involved, right? So technologies are not innocent, never are. They're never neutral. And we have tried now to create all kinds of devices, digital devices, to channel Holocaust memory into the digital age. Virtual reality, augmented reality. We've done it all, and some of them are also successful. But my theory here, my interpretation here is we have failed. We have failed because this, for example, there exists no successful video game about the Holocaust. And video games are one of the most important sources of historical consciousness in the present. Absolutely decisive. We have not managed. Why have we not managed? Do we lack courage? Are maybe digital culture, video games, not compatible with the structure of cosmopolitan memory? How do you implement self-reflexivity and self-criticism in a video game without making this a terribly unentertaining game? We haven't figured it out yet, and I'm not sure why, but it doesn't exist. Next problem. A lot of our memory is created by artificial intelligence. 30% of the texts you consume are made by artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is terrible at history, it's terrible at memory. There are lots of reasons why it's terrible, at the moment at least. One of them is it doesn't have a register of truth. It has probability, not truth. Probability vis-a-vis its feed. right? Therefore, this is a significant problem for historians, and it should be a significant problem for the memory we create by way of artificial intelligence. It has no way of footnoting. There is no vertical memory in it. We can talk about the details if you want to, but that problem still is a very significant problem. It is inherently conservative because artificial intelligence is creating an average based on the texts that it has absorbed, right? So it's always about something that already happened in the past. It's not a very creative medium. And this kind of repetitiveness of artificial intelligence has also caused a repetitively nasty nature, right? It tends to swear, it tends to become racist and sexist unless we filter it. The filtering is very important, but the filtering, again, makes it less creative. So, as a result, artificial intelligence, as we practice it at the moment, is actually full of filters, and let's call a spade, censorship. Maybe censorship is important. I don't want to come back to that question, but it is the case, right? So it's bad. Here, one of my favorite examples. Every couple of weeks, I ask DALL-E 2 to give me an image of a room in a Holocaust exhibit. And every single time the answer is, I can't do that. Why? Because DALL-E 2 is very scared of running afoul European laws that prohibit the denial of the Holocaust. So, think about this. One of the key technologies that we use on a daily basis to interpret the past and the present is basically telling us, can't go there, right? So we are creating this kind of black hole in the middle of our culture where an allegedly very important event cannot be remembered because our technology doesn't allow it. That's the problem. We haven't transitioned. So we need to figure this out. Next one, social forgetting. I want to throw forgetting into the mix because right now, in the last years, especially since COVID, we have changed our position. We in the West have changed our position about the relationship between violent speech and violent action. In the past, in the analog electronic media ecology, it was very clear. Don't act violently, but you may speak violently. Freedom of speech, right? And with gatekeepers in place, that seemed to have worked very well. Right now, it's not working anymore, and it's the left, it's the NGOs, it's the activists are telling us we have to curb what is allowable on our platforms. So Facebook was one of the first ones to respond to pressure and take out COVID denial. That was one of the first acts of systematic censorship by Facebook. But similar questions have been raised by the Me Too movement. They are raised by Black Lives Matter all the time. Think about it. If you want to put some of the demands of Black Lives Matter into a nutshell, and I hear that you have a case also on campus. If you want to put it into a nutshell, then it's the following principle. If you see a representation of past perpetrators that would make those perpetrators happy, it's got to go. You may disagree with that or agree with it. That's not the point. But the point is taking things out of circulation. The Confederacy and its self-definition got to disappear. Right? Again, you can have different positions. I've changed my position several times. But nevertheless, it's a very interesting gesture of forgetting. And the same is also true for the environmental movement. Has similar demands, and they have been successful. At the moment, you can no longer make a profit on many platforms by channeling climate change denial. The big players in the West have, as a result, all tried to implement policies of creating limits of representation in social media contexts. The American is the Foster-Sesta, Britain is the Online Safety Bill, one of the first initiatives after Brexit, and the European is the most important initiative, is the Digital Services Act that becomes law as we speak. Right? You can disagree with them or not, but this concerted effort of redefining the limits of the permissible, they're very important, and inducing limits of the permissible is always inducing processes of forgetting, because what is taken off the platforms is collectively very likely to be forgotten. We have a strange situation at the moment. We have 3 global superpowers of censorship. China is the best one. There is no working memory of the massacre of Tiananmen Square in Chinese society. 1989 doesn't exist. Why does it not exist? Because of censorship. The other superpowers are obviously Silicon Valley, who has a technological know-how, no interest in censorship, but is constantly asked to do so, first and foremost by the European Union. And the European Union is the only player here that has a semblance of democratic legitimacy. So in that sense, our money should be there. But all of these examples induce us, tell us to rethink forgetting. Forgetting is maybe not a problem. Forgetting is part of the solution. So forget responsibly. What should we forget? What should be taken out of circulation? Where can we make our society remember in ways that are healthy and not self-destructive, right? So these are also scholars who have raised this question. We might want to think towards such a thing as cosmopolitan forgetting, because we like the values of cosmopolitanism, human rights. But maybe remembrance is not the best way of delivering on them. So forgetting should be part of our way of thinking about future memories. By the way, even Holocaust institutions are in the process of removing. This is one of the most recent exhibits done in Germany, in the Haus der Wannsee-Konferenz. And if you go through the exhibit, you come out of it and you realize no atrocity images. So that happens even in the center of Holocaust memory. My favorite institution, if you want an example where forgetting is taking place systematically, and I would argue responsibly, go to the National Museum of the American Indian. When the museum opened, 2004, 2005, I think, when it opened, there were 2 points of criticism. The experts criticized the museum for not following the white systems of classifications for objects, and the second one was, we gave you a platform to create a massive cosmopolitan memory, a memory of your victimhood, and a memory of our failure, right? And you didn't do it. Because what the museum is about is complete. It's not that the facts are denied. They are there. They're in the small print. How many people died? How many people were killed? It's there. The massacres, they are there. But they're not the focus. The focal point is a utopia. The focal point is a utopia of an indigenous American peaceful society. You may agree or disagree with that, be that as it may, but this is an attempt to participate in a process of memory management, partial responsible forgetting. That's why I like this example. So here, forgetting seems to, we have to pay more attention to forgetting, and not just remembrance. We have to see it as a mix, as a balance, and we also have to recognize humans are much better at forgetting than remembering. So memory, so therefore this might be an important resource. Last one, my field, memory studies, right? And I just want to give you a couple of examples here to cite some of the key scholars in the field. One of them is Michael Rothberg, having a very tough time, UCLA, having a very tough time in Germany right now because he has raised questions about cosmopolitan memory and Holocaust uniqueness. That's his work, and the book caused a huge discussion in Germany when it was translated in 2021. It's originally from 2009. In memory studies, this is one of our Bibles. In Germany, he's persona non grata, which tells you a lot about the dynamics of memory. Here, some scholars who have made precisely this argument. Cosmopolitan memory, Holocaust memory, is often part of the problem, not part of the solution. It has misconstrued the relationship between values and behavior. Humans are not driven by values. Humans are driven by adaptive strategies. Again, you can disagree or agree. A lot of the practices of reparations for victims of World War II have led to very ugly competitive victimhood. And finally, Valentina Pisanti from Italy has even argued that our laws to outlaw Holocaust denial have actually caused the rise of the right in Europe. Again, it's an interpretation. Very interesting, just in the last year, these publications that all make the case. If you look at how Holocaust memory is practiced in Germany, you have to realize that it is a practice of exclusion, not inclusion, because time and again, people who are perceived as migrants and others are not included in that Holocaust memory. So there is exactly this contradiction, right? It's supposed to be a resource of human rights, but it leads to the exclusion of people. Again, studies, interpretations, they need to be taken seriously. So memory scholars, memory study is my field, is already full-out post-colonial. That's an observation. I'm sometimes it's moving so fast that I get nervous about it, but it's happening. And the second point is memory always works comparatively. You're seeing a problem, you look back. How do I make sense of that? What can I compare it to? Even if in your interpretation that comparison is no longer visible, you always compare. That's one of the axioms of the study. Okay, the way forward. Now, as I said initially, remember I said we have to differentiate between fact and interpretations. Interpretations are based on values and politics, right? So let me put my politics and values on the table. I anticipate this is our big problem. Climate change is our biggest problem in the future. So my question would be, how can our memory culture contribute to solving that problem? That problem is linked to questions of migration, massive amounts. If we think the numbers that have come to Europe over the Mediterranean have come to the United States over the Mexican border, if we think now the numbers are large, let's wait a decade. You know, the numbers will absolutely explode. You got to deal with it. One way or another, we got to deal with it. And now the question is, when we look back at Holocaust memory, is Holocaust memory functional here? Can it help us? Does it help us? Does it give us the narrative frames, the argument to do this? Maybe. I'm not so sure. I'm not sure about it, but this is where I think we want to go. I would want to welcome a memory culture that differentiates between facts and interpretations. Come out, can say, these are the facts, this is my interpretation, and these are my values. I give you this interpretation of these facts because these are my values that I like to support. Come out openly, be transparent about it. It makes our discussion much easier than coming out with a suggestion of how people should craft their memory and insisting that these are the facts, because they never are, right? So transparency and honesty, I think, is important. As I said earlier, we need to construct positive we's. People want to have positive self-images. Yes, there are moments for self-criticism. They exist and have been very important historically. But we also need positive we's. So we do need heroism in one way or another. They need to be nationally framed and transnationally framed. We need to figure out how to use digital memories better for that purpose. We don't know yet exactly what they're good at. One hypothesis here, I would argue social media platforms should be good, video games should be good at exploring different degrees of implicatedness. Yeah, where how I am implicated in the problem of climate change. What do I do? Can I explore this? Can I do this counterfactually? Should I fly all the way from Denmark to Utah? What damage do I do? How do I make a decision responsibly, right? These kinds of questions. And I think digital resources could be very good at that and raising counterfactual, exploring our options counterfactually. Now, that's what I said, explicit norms. Be transparent about your values, and then set limits to representation. That question of censorship. Set limits, yes. Revisit them. Do it democratically. Create an agency that is created democratically, has democratic legitimacy, where it's very prominent, and is accountable to the public. Right now, the people who make decisions about content all the time, they're not accountable to the public. They're not democratic legitimacy. That needs to change, I would argue, because defining limits is very important. If you want to have a fact-driven culture, we need to have limits. Think about it. These environments where facts count, they have to be created, they have to be protected. Trump finds out at the moment that there is such an environment, the law, where lying has consequences. And if you lie about the size of your apartment, it has consequences. Again, you might disagree with that, but this is an environment where facts count. I would want my memory culture to be constructed in such a way that facts count there as well. It doesn't do at the moment. Yeah? Often it doesn't. Now the question of forgetting, very provocative. I'm almost done. Very provocative. I would say we can do with a lot of less military heroism. Let's forget some of that. Because one of the dangers is, if your memory culture is focused on military heroism, if you see a problem, you tend towards military solutions. And they don't work. And I think as one society is figuring right now, that the memory of its own military successes is not part of the solution, but part of the problem. It's Israeli society. So there we can do a lot of forgetting. I also think reducing the memory of other people's failures and crimes. Try to focus on one's own failures. I don't think it's that productive, again, for Israeli society to focus so much on being the super victims. Yes, that's true, and maybe not always. There are other people as well who are forgotten. But maybe it's very important to think one's self-implicatedness, including the implicatedness on a lower level. Not vast crimes, but on a lower level. To what extent am I a climate perpetrator, for example, right? And then, the heroes, the positive. Let's craft new categories of heroes. I want to have a category of heroes, for example, in the bureaucracy. The people who, for instance, make decent, responsible climate policies that can also be financed, right? Let's celebrate these people. That it's a big piece of work to put legislation into action. It's a big piece of work to put successful social media censorship into action. Let's highlight some of these people, some of these processes. There are lots of other registers we can go. And then having questions of migration, create different memories. And here America has fantastic opportunities. Last thing I said, comparatively. Here, that's where we are. In America, I would say there are two different types of memories about migration. There is a memory of migration that is very prominent in the political parties and maybe also in the state, and this is a memory of failure on the right. And yes, the immigration policies of the United States are in many ways, in terms of policy, they are a failure. But there's a completely different memory of migration in American civil society. American civil society often has a very positive memory of migration. That's the one we need to embrace. I think that would be very important. And you can have environmental heroes and still have negative dystopian memory of the Anthropocene as we are facing it. So here's and you see, right, if you compared, American society is not far away. It's not that far away from what I recommend to, I would say, where it is now. So in that sense, despite all this criticism, at the very end, I'm the bearer of good news for your society. Almost.
That was extraordinarily rich. Thank you so much, Professor Kansteiner. We will have about 15 minutes for discussion. If you do need to leave in order to get to a 1 o'clock appointment, you're welcome to do so now, but otherwise we invite you to stay and participate in our conversation. If you do have a question for our speaker, just raise your hand. We have a microphone in the back that will come to you. Once you receive the microphone, we invite you to stand, tell us who you are. If you're a student here, just tell us what you study here at BYU, and feel free to raise your question. For those who are in the lobby or who have been watching from the lobby, there are seats now in the main room. You're welcome to come on in if you'd like to participate together in our Q&A. So again, we'll go till about 1 o'clock. Thank you.
My name is Sam Johnson. I'm a marketing student here at BYU. My question is, as we move forward, especially as young people navigating historical conversations, how can we have these conversations and be incredibly sensitive when they're brief conversations or they're quick? Is there anything that you would suggest to be just aware of so we're not sounding insensitive to others?
Excellent question, and I've been thinking about that as well, because I think we have challenges we are facing. So in that sense, we can't waste time talking around it in a very polite way, right? We need to address the issues, and that's why I feel this differentiation between fact and interpretation can be very useful, right? Where you use the facts to establish a common basis. And how you deal with people who deny the facts, that's another very important issue. But that's also where you can make decisions. Say, look, are we in agreement here about the facts? And then you see, and then you say, my interpretation and my suggestion is such, yours might be others. It opens possibilities of clearly positioning oneself transparently, openly, and not necessarily aggressively. Don't insist that yours is the truth, because on these different levels, it is not the truth. It's always relative. It's relative to criteria, and we should be open about them. So I completely hear you. And that balancing act of not offending people, especially not offending the people who are possible allies, right? You don't want to offend them. But at the very same time, also taking a stand. And I think the one place where it's safe to take a stand is vis-a-vis the facts and vis-a-vis your values. We also say, it's subjective. They're mine. Yeah? They don't have to be your values, they're mine. I invite you to consider my values and my argument. I invite you to consider it, and I'm happy to listen to yours. I think that's very important. That's an ability we have lost because we're always arguing, yelling at each other on social platforms all the time. I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. And it's almost never true. So in that sense, I hear you. I think you put precisely the point where that's going to be one of the biggest challenges of American society, right? And hence, yes, politically, I'm in complete disagreement with Trump. But I can argue, I can also listen. I can listen to it. I can analyze it, and I say, look, where we part ways is when you simply, where it's just lies, right? But when it's interpretations that are not based on my values, I can say, interesting. I disagree, but I learn, right? So in that sense, I think that might be one of the strategies, and I do think one can practice that in everyday life. Think about a historical exhibit, right? Think about a historical exhibit where you differentiate, and you say, look, this is an exhibit about Rwanda, right? Touchy subject. We just have the anniversary, right? So you say, these are the facts. These are our interpretations. There are other interpretations, right? You can do this. And the audiences are smart. They can handle the difference between these different layers. I hope that's an answer.
Hi, my name is Haley. I'm a nursing student here at BYU, and I was just wondering, I feel like this lecture really underscored how memory impacts the decisions that we make even just today. And I was wondering if you feel like you've seen a lot of ways that we've maybe overcorrected in the ways that our memory impacts. Maybe we go so far to the other extreme just to get away from that. And then if you have, like, what ways we as individuals can kind of reflect on our own tendencies to overcorrect, and what ways we can just kind of balance learning from our mistakes but not like going to the other extreme.
Very good question. I mean, my question would be immediately, what is going too far, right? I mean, there might be different ways of going too far. But I'm in agreement with you in the sense that, for instance, going too far would, in my view, be not recognizing that collectives and societies have a desire, legitimate desire, for positive memories, right? And so to speak, moving only in this framework of extreme existential self-doubt and self-criticism. And that's a very provocative statement to make for a German, right? A very provocative statement. So my German colleagues would immediately say, "Oi, well, where is he going with that?" Right? So in that sense, it's not an easy way to say. But that would be one way where I feel, yeah, what is the going too far, right? And the other question I raised it here is, yes, the question of defining limits. Defining limits of the tolerable is it's a loaded question. I mean, the tradition and the value of free speech is so important in the history of America and the history of the West. But nevertheless, we are in a situation where the question has to be raised, and it has to be answered. It has to be answered responsibly, transparently, and democratically. That would be my answer. We're not doing this very well at the moment. But even here, you can go too far either way. You can go too far without having limits, and you can go way easily go too far in terms of censorship. I hope that was answering part of your question.
My name's Talis Barker. I'm studying mechanical engineering. I was wondering if how we can use examples in history of some of the constructed narratives, constructed memories, say, the German exceptionalism that became very popular towards the tail end of the Weimar Republic. How we can take our interpretation of those memories that were constructed and apply them to how we face the consequences of such things happening today, like the pyramid, the triangle that you referenced with Trump.
It's a very good question. I mean, look, and you caught me almost here in a crime of not being specific enough. So let me give you an example, which again is provocative. Because as I said, we are comparing all the time, right? So that what you're saying is we're doing it. It's not even, we don't even have a choice about it. As humans, as societies, this moving back and forth, that's nature for us, right? So how do we do it responsibly? I think one of the important points is doing transparently again, and do it. Let's take an example. Let's take Gaza as an example and say, okay, where are parallels in history, right? And I don't blame Israeli society for going to the Holocaust history as a reference point, because the Holocaust is their memory, and so they have to use their resources to try to make sense of what was a catastrophe for Israeli society on October 7th. So it's perfectly normal to go there. I'm not in agreement how they applied Holocaust memory, but that they go there makes perfect sense. I would suggest other parallels. So let me give you a concrete example. If you are convinced that the history of Nazi Germany and the post-war history of Germany is a good reference point to try to make sense of the crisis and conflict in Gaza, right? Then I would say 2 reference points make sense. I would be one of the people arguing that if you do absolutely want to compare here, and I'm not sure if it's so productive, then yes, the comparison that I would make is between the Nazi ghettos in occupied Eastern Europe and Gaza, right? Using borders that are more or less impenetrable, using famine as a tool. Yeah, unfortunately, that's quite, for me as a historian, quite parallel. The second parallel, and here I'm really provocative, if I would suggest if Israelis really want to take German history and learn from it, then take the Berlin Wall, because that can teach you how to build a wall properly. Because that's Israel society had a choice. In the days and hours after the attack, they had a choice. Maybe not Netanyahu, because he used it for political purposes, but they had a choice. They're looking back and trying to make sense of it. And they had a choice. They could say, okay, our security measures failed spectacularly. How can we solve that problem? Right? That would have been a choice to do that. And there are other examples to do that. Now, nobody would have blamed Israeli society by moving in and saying, okay, we need a different type of defensive installation here, right? Taking a moment and using completely other parallels than going as a default option to the military option. Right? And lots of observers now say that's precisely the problem. Even in New York Times, it's now mainstream interpretation in New York Times to say what Israel did was to make the same mistakes that America made in Afghanistan, for example, right? And I'm not an expert here. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's precisely a way of doing this. And I, for one, that is also my positioning, in my generational positioning. I, for one, I grew up during the rise of cosmopolitan memory in West Germany, right? So for me, that's still an attractive memory option. So I, for one, have a certain partiality, despite the fact that I understand heroism is important. I have a partiality to, let's look back. Something happened. What have we done wrong? Where have we been bad? Where have we failed? That should be part of the equation, would be my suggestion, right? And I'm not sure if how it will play out. Hopefully that was an answer. Yes.
Okay, it's going to be me. My name is Luca. I'm studying interdisciplinary humanities in German. And as you were talking, one of the things that came to mind specifically about film is Jonathan Glazer's recent film, Zone of Interest, which I'm sure you've seen and have thought about and talked about, if not written about. And the thing that's interesting about that film is it feels like post-colonial in nature, because in the press really, or maybe not, but at least, and I'm curious what you have to say about that, because in the press around it, he said things like, we're responsible now. The film is about the nowness of the Holocaust, not the thenness of the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And along with that, I'm just curious about what you think in general about the affordances of film in mediating collective memory and how we should deal with that, and also forgetting. Because especially, anyways, in that film, there's that one super interesting scene near the end where it's just documentary footage of people cleaning the camp or cleaning the memorial today. So I was just curious, kind of your thoughts generally about that.
Excellent question. I was almost hoping for that question. I think you put your finger right on it, because I think we need to differentiate between the film as a product and the discussion surrounding the film. I think the film is still squarely anchored in cosmopolitan memory, but the discussions are surrounding post-colonial memory, right? Because the scene at the Oscars became so controversial because I would think he was embracing post-colonial frames of remembrance. We are bad. But the film, I would say, is still more about we were bad. And in many ways, what is so intriguing about it, it's not a visual document. it's an oral. I mean, you hear. The listening is much, much more important, I would say, than the visual. So it's a perfect example for a very, very late addition to a canon, because you need to have observed and absorbed the visuality of Holocaust images in order to understand it, right? So in that sense, it's very self-reflexive and very late in the process. Absolutely intriguing. But love your question. You're absolutely right.
Thank you so much for being with us.